Welcome back to our automation series. Today we're covering data tables. So we're going to cover data tables, the global type converter, and how object creation works. The first time we used a data table, we just had it come through as a list of strings. This is the easiest implementation. But now we want to create a list of objects. To do this, we're going to need a model object. It's going to be a product. And then we need to set up a default transformer. This is going to apply across the entire project. So we're going to use the @DefaultDataTableTransformer annotation, and then we'll also need the object mapper class. And it's going to look like this on the right. So the top row is the name of your field, name, description, or quantity, and then each row after that represents a new object. And then at the end of the video, we're going to cover how does this work, constructors versus setters, and then primitive data types versus the wrapper classes. Let's start fresh and create a new feature file. Go into your features folder and create a new file called data table practice, and then it ends in .feature. Give your feature a name and then your scenario a name. Given a product exists, name, description, and quantity, and then I'll fill out some products. Then in your step definitions folder, create a new Java class called practice data tables, and use the @given annotation. A product exists. Public void, give it a name, and then import. Next, let's create our model product class with a private string name, description, and quantity. Then I'm going to automatically generate my default constructor and all of my getters and setters. And then also my toString method. And just FYI, you can use Java Lombok instead. You would annotate it with @getter, @setter, @noargsConstructor, and @toString. So in our step definition, we're going to pass in data table. Make sure to import the correct one. And then we're going to say list of products is equal to data table as list. Notice we get a compile error because data table as list gives you a list of strings, not a list of products. So I can pass in product.class, and this fixes the compile issue. I'm going to add some print line statements so we can see what happens. Remember, we have the tag run this test. So I'm going to use this tag and annotate my scenario so I can run it. Then run it using the test runner. If you notice, we get a big error. There is no table entry or table row transformer, and there's no default table entry transformer. So basically what this is saying is, I don't know what to do with this. I have no way of converting this map of string into a product. So create a new Java class called cucumberconfig, and it's going to have a single field, private final object mapper, and instantiate it. If you're not familiar, this object mapper can transform Java objects into JSON and back, but it can also transform Cucumber data tables to Java objects. We then use the annotation @DefaultDataTableTransformer, public object default transformer. We pass in a map of string to string and a type of type. We then return objectMapper.convertValue and pass in the entry, and objectMapper.constructType and pass in the type. So data tables are naturally in the map of string to string format, and what this method does is it converts it to an object in Java. So now that we have this configuration, when I run it, I can see it's successfully converted to a list of products. Okay, let's take a minute to explain how exactly this works. In our model class, I'm going to add some print line statements to the default constructor and then the setters. When I run it, you can see that the default constructor is called and then all of the setters. So this is very important. It does not call an allargs constructor. It calls the default constructor and then each setter method. What this means is none of these fields can be final. If you try to make it final, you'll have to have a constructor that takes in that value and sets it. But even if you do that and remove the setters, you'll get this really weird, huge error. Basically what's happening is Cucumber is trying to call the setter method, and in this case, it doesn't exist. That being said, you can use this to your advantage. For example, in our setQuantity method, we could have some custom logic that says if quantity is less than 0, throw a new invalid argument exception. This can allow you to have a lot more control over your data and object creation. Here's a couple more things to note. Notice the description for the first product came through as Sony console, but when I look at it in the feature file, it has all this white space. So Cucumber automatically trims your strings. Also, if you're creating one and you get some weird formatting issues, in IntelliJ you can Command Option L to auto format if you're on Mac. Lastly, if I just leave everything blank, you can see that it comes through as null for the name and null for the description. But for the quantity, it came across as 0. That's because we define this quantity as a primitive. So the default value is 0. The same would be true if we used a Boolean. If you don't pass anything in, it would default to false. Let's change this to the wrapper class of integer and then regenerate our setter. This time when it comes through, it comes across as null. That's because wrapper classes can be null. So if you do want it to have a default value, you're going to use a primitive data type. But if you want no default and allow it to be null, you're going to use the wrapper class.